Dual Channel Closed Loop Supply Chains, a state-of-the-art review, which I co-authored with Professor Imam Baihaqi. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you a little introduction on the background of my research topic, and then I'm going to do a literature review and identify my research gap. I'm going to also explain the research methodology that I used for doing this review, and I'm going to finally give you the results and the conclusions of my research. So my topic originates from two main topics, that of reverse logistics and the use of e-commerce in supply chains. So what is reverse logistics? Maurice Fleischmann in 2000 had a very long definition, but I usually summarize reverse logistics as the management of products and processes that go in the opposite direction or to the traditional forward supply chain. And reverse logistics begins when we collect or acquire used products from customers, then we transport them to the point of inspection where we determine the disposition method. By disposition, we mean processes like reuse, refurbishing, remanufacturing, and recycling. After the disposition process, the products are resold. So the dual channel supply chain has been traditionally defined as a supply chain in which a manufacturer sells products both directly and indirectly. By directly, we mean selling them through an online channel, and indirectly, it's like selling them through a retailer. So in the traditional forward chain, the dual channel has been beneficial, for example, for companies like Nike and IBM who have been able to access customer segments that they could not reach through traditional retail channels. And customers go to shop for a product in an offline channel, but they buy it online at a cheaper price. And in the closed loop supply chain, companies like Love Recycling in China actually used dual channels for the recycling of waste electrical and electronic products, and they used things like reverse vending machines, and they collected we online, and we have Xerox sending its vendors to collect products while it's installing new products, and at the same time they used mailboxes for customers to return products without acquiring any cost. At the same time, there was a problem where HP had a problem with their reseller, and the reseller had actually become opportunistic, and they could not distinguish between the new and remanufactured products. So HP had no choice but to sell remanufactured products online while it's selling new products offline. I did carry out a literature review by identifying almost all the most recent literature reviews on reverse logistics, closed loop supply chains, and the circular economy. On my screen there, I did not show all the literature reviews, but if you are holding my paper right now, you can see more of those reviews. And the ones I listed on my screen are the ones that were actually closer to my review. The one that is very close to my review was by Shekari in 2020, who actually carried out a systematic review on supply chains that actually used game theory, on closed loop supply chains that used game theory as a method of research. This research is very close to my own because most of the papers in my review actually appeared in Shekari 2020's paper, because game theory is the common method that was used in the dual channel closed loop supply chains. And the other paper that was close to my review was by Master in 2020 again, and they carried out a review on uncertainties that are inherent in closed loop supply chains. So now, to my knowledge, there's been no review that actually carried out the use of multi-channels and dual channels in closed loop supply chains, which is my research gap. So for my research methodology, I used what we call a qualitative content analysis as described by Seoring and Gold in 2012. In this method, we start by collecting the materials, then we carry out what we call the descriptive analysis, then we select categories for each paper, then we finally carry out the material evaluation. In collecting the materials, I used the Web of Science and Google Scholar. Then I cross-checked my papers from the Web of Science with those of Google Scholar to make sure there were no repetitions. After uh, collecting the papers, I carried out the manual analysis of the selected papers by reading their abstracts. Then I searched for additional articles. To the right of my screen, you can see my review protocol. In my review protocol, my inclusion criteria was only articles focusing on dual or multi-channels in reverse logistics or closed-loop supply chains. My language was limited to English, and the time span, I looked at all accepted articles available online up to June 2020, and the article type was that only accepted articles in peer-reviewed journals available online. I did not look at what we call gray literature, and that is conference proceedings, book sections, book chapters, and lecture notes. And in my exclusion criteria, I ignored articles published in Chinese or other languages, and my keywords depended on Boolean operators and or. By The words that I used are dual channel and closed loop supply chain, or dual recycling channel, or dual channel and reverse logistics. In validating my materials, I carried out a manual analysis of abstracts, and I read all papers left in the sample. And I also carried out what we call the snowball approach by carrying out forward searches, mostly from recommended articles in Elsevier, and I also carried out backward searches, mostly in references of selected articles. During the descriptive analysis, as you can see on the graph on the left side of my screen, you can see that um, the distribution of the papers is erratic, but the general trend is an increase on publications on the dual channel closed loop supply chains. Also, you can see that the topic is new, as we have the first publication on the topic actually in 2010. And like I said, it's erratic. You can actually say that there are more papers in this year. The year with the highest publications actually had 14 publications, which actually shows you that the topic is actually a new one that is still growing. And on the right side of my screen, you can see that most of the papers were also scattered across journals, as there is a large number on the other section. And although the Journal of Cleaner Production had the highest number of publications, there were only 12 again. And you can see that the topic is also still new. In selecting categories, I actually used what I call the deductive approach, whereby theory defined by existing authors, and I also used what we call the inductive approach, where I developed my own categories. I'll now explain these approaches. In the deductive approach, I actually used the classification of closed loop supply chains problems into strategic, tactical, and operational issues are defined by SUSE in 2013, and I also separated the studies into either reverse logistics or closed loop supply chains. And from the graph on the right hand of my screen, you can see that the majority of the papers that I had are focused on closed loop supply chains rather than reverse logistics. And you can also see that there were no publication on operational issues of closed loop supply chains, and the majority of the authors actually are focused on strategic issues of closed loop supply chains. In the inductive approach of classifying my papers, I used the two methods. The first method was based on how authors define dual channels, and the second method was based on content analysis of the papers. In the definition of dual channels, I discovered that authors defined dual channels based on either selling channels or collection of used products or using disposition method or combination of more than one dual channel. And from the pie chart on the right hand side of my screen, you can see that the majority of authors actually defined dual channels based on selling channels, and 18% of the authors based on collecting channels, 12% based on disposition method, and 9% based on a combination of dual channels. In the content analysis, I actually managed to have 9 categories based on what the papers contained, and the majority of the papers actually focused on pricing and reverse channel decisions. And the least looked area into was greening strategies and carbon emissions, and as well as supply chain dynamics and stability. So to define my results, I actually explained my results through the research gaps. I identified a lot of research gaps if you're holding my paper there, but I'm just going to summarize a few ones, the most general ones. As you can see, most of the papers, actually, there was very few focus on the competition between channels in dual channel closed loop supply chain. This includes competition in selling, collection, and remanufacturing. That research that actually focused on competition did not consider looking into the risk attitude of different supply chain players. Most of the publications actually focused on assumed that all players are risk neutral without considering scenarios where there are supply chain players that can be risk seeking or risk averse. Also, there is need for more investigation into supply chain dynamics and stability of dual channel closed loop supply chains. There was actually one publication that actually focused on measuring the bullwhip effect in dual channel closed loop supply chains, which showed that it can be done, and it is a gap that needs to be explored further. And we have very few studies combining greening strategies, carbon emissions, and social welfare issues with the dual channel closed loop supply chains. As you can see, the most concerned right now is things like social and environmental sustainability, and these need to be looked into more by the dual channel closed loop supply chains, and studies focusing on all three dimensions of sustainability. Most of the studies actually focus on economic stability, economic sustainability. There is very few focusing on social and environmental sustainability, and they need to combine pricing strategies with supply chain coordination, green issues, and social welfare issues for the dual channel supply chains. And as you can see, almost all the publications assumed that new and remanufactured products are similar, and they need to relax this assumption because in reality, new and remanufactured products are not similar, and mostly they are sold in different markets. And it is also necessary for studies to consider quality issues in the collection of products. Most studies have the assumption that returns have uniform quality, and this is not always the case. And also, to simplify mathematical modeling, almost all the studies assumed symmetrical information, that is, all players in the supply chain receiving the same information. Again, this is not always the case in real supply chains, and someone is to explore asymmetrical information in dual channel closed loop supply chains. The majority of the publications also assumed deterministic demand patterns, and this is also not the case in reality. So they need to research to explore stochastic demand patterns in dual channel closed loop supply chains. Finally, the majority of the studies focused on game theory as a method of modeling the dual channel closed loop supply chains. There is a need to explore other quantitative models and mathematical tools to solve the dual channel supply chain problems such as complexity and chaos analysis and H infinity control. That is all from me. Thank you very much.
So that is our presentations. Okay, so do you have any questions? Could you please raise your hand or just speak directly if you have any questions? So the paper was about the dual channel closed loop supply chain, the literature review. Any questions? Icon 5. All right,